In the past, we've discussed the Republic Navy as well as the Imperial Navy, but I figured today we could focus more on the transition, and specifically, we'll discuss the Republic ships that ended up serving in the Imperial Navy. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So I just want to throw out there before we begin that I will be focusing not on individual vessels, but instead on ship classes and the roles they played following the end of the Clone Wars. I'm not going to necessarily get into details about specific ships and where they went beyond the end of the conflict, instead focusing more on larger classes as a whole. So let's just jump right in with the first one you're thinking of when you think of the Republic Navy. Let's talk about the Venator. Now, during the war, the Venator served as the mainstay warship of the Grand Army of the Republic's Navy, and it was a pretty significant piece of naval strategy used by the Republic. So what role did it play within the new empire? Well, based sheerly on the prominence of this vessel within the Republic Navy, it was very present in the immediate aftermath of the war. We know that Venators played a significant role within Imperial fleets for at least the first year or two of the Empire's reign, as they were slowly replaced with Imperial-Class Star Destroyers. Now, it's likely that the Venators would stick around as training ships and maybe dedicated carriers in more backwater systems, while the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer became the prominent warship in the core worlds and along significant trade routes, but it's likely that within 5 years of the end of the Clone Wars, the Venator was basically completely extinct from the Imperial Navy. Now, as I've said in past videos, I do think the Venator has a really awesome application as a training vessel for the Empire. The presence of 2 bridges allows you to train 2 bridge crews simultaneously. The massive hangar space is perfect for training vast quantities of TIE fighter pilots, something that the Empire will certainly need, seeing the kind of strategies they plan to employ. However, we don't know for sure that it was ever used to fill this purpose following the end of the war, so any thoughts on that are just speculation. But the Venator wasn't the only large vessel in service with the Republic during the war. The other major large vessel utilized by the Republic during the conflict was the Acclamator. The thing is, the Acclamator served a very unique role during the conflict, serving as a large-scale troop transport and massive troop lander. It was capable of deploying vast quantities of military hardware to the battlefield really quickly, and that's perfect for a nation fighting a full-scale galactic war where planetary invasions are a everyday reality. But for the Empire, things are a little different. The Empire was more focused on policing the galaxy, and their interventions didn't need to be massive planetary invasions, but instead landings usually on planets that were at least partially in favor of Imperial rule. As such, these massive, heavily armed dropships weren't really necessary. Instead, things like the Sentinel-class landing craft could take over that role. That brings us to the smaller vessels of the Republic Navy, of which there are 2 ship classes that sort of filled the small vessel role, at least from a combat standpoint, that were used during the conflict. The first one is maybe the most significant holdover from the days of the Republic that maintained its presence in the Imperial Navy, and that's the Arquitens. The Arquitens almost has a bigger reputation as an Imperial cruiser than it did with the Republic. The Architans started serving during the second half of the Clone Wars, where it served as a small command ship, as well as being able to come face-to-face with smaller separatist warships. However, during that conflict, the Architens was pretty outgunned by most separatist cruisers. But with the rise of the Galactic Empire and no real major faction to sort of counter them, the presence of a smaller cruiser was actually a really nice tool for the Empire to have at their disposal. As such, they continued producing Architens, and it appears that they actually started producing more of them following the end of the war. The Architens filled a very different role within the Galactic Empire, ultimately serving like miniature Imperial-class Star Destroyers. They were deployed to carry out things like blockades and policing operations when an Imperial-class Star Destroyer would have simply been overkill. Because of this, the Architens stuck around basically the entire duration of the Empire, even existing beyond the collapse of the Empire in a few Imperial holdouts like what we see under the command of Moff Gideon during the events of The Mandalorian. And last but not least is the Consular-Class cruiser. Now, this is the only one that we know of that didn't have any history following the end of the war. Now, I would wager that a few of them likely stuck around, but by the time of the conflict, a lot of these cruisers were very old. Many of these were converted from older vessels utilized by the Republic before the conflict for sort of diplomatic roles and peacekeeping missions, and they were basically just shifted over to a warship role following the outbreak of the war. As such, these vessels were fairly old and not really well equipped for combat, so after the rise of the Empire simply ditched all of these. As far as we know, none of them saw any service following the end of the conflict, and they were likely shipped off to scrapyards pretty quickly following the declaration of a new order, and the reorganization of the Republic Navy into the Imperial Navy. Still, all of this sort of depicts the shift between the Imperial Naval Doctrine and the doctrine practiced by the Republic. The Republic Navy was a very unique piece of the history of the Republic, as they didn't have much of a navy before the start of the Clone Wars. And if you'd like to learn about how they organized that navy that basically came out of nowhere, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think the changes made to the ship rosters used by the Imperial Navy were really good ideas. Do you think they should have kept the Venator around in a larger capacity? Do you think the Acclamator was an amazing dropship and the Empire should have sort of kept it in their back pocket? Let me know down in the comments what you're thinking. And also let me know down below if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.